Hi everyone, and welcome back to my Zero to KSM Challenge series, episode 4. This is a continuation of the previous episode, as all the dungeons in this episode were cleared in the same week, this being the second week of the challenge. Hope you enjoy! The first dungeon for the day was my downgraded key from the previous episode, a Vortex Pinnacle 15. Not too much to look out for in this dungeon. I feel like this is one of the easier keys to run on a fortified week. Some of the trash can be a little bit nasty, especially when moving towards the final boss, but overall I quite enjoy running this dungeon. At the start of the dungeon, I pull the initial pack and the mobs on the bridge, making sure to avoid any AoEs and interrupting the casters. Once the casters are dead, I started kiting the armoured minstrels across the bridge towards the next pack of mobs. I then just continued to clear the packs one by one as we made our way to the first boss. On the first boss, I pulled the 2 Cloud Princes, and it was on this pull where we had our first death. Our warrior unfortunately stood inside one of the AoE circles while Turbulence was being cast and died. We combat resed him, killed the pack, and moved on to the first boss. The first boss is very easy. Just make sure everyone is looking at one of the ads he spawns and interrupt the lightning bolt cast while avoiding the balls of lightning and staying inside the cyclones. As the boss cast his first cyclone shield, our healer died off my screen. I believe to a combination of lightning orbs and being outside the cyclone's ring, causing him to take more damage and die. We had already used our res to revive our warrior in the previous pull, and as such had no way to res the healer in combat. This meant that interrupting the lightning bolts became more important. We were fortunate enough to not get any more afflicted ad spawns after our healer died, and managed to kill the boss without any more deaths. Other than these 2 deaths in the first third of the dungeon, we had no more deaths for the rest of the run. We very nearly missed the +2 timer, beating the time with just under 1 second remaining, allowing us to 2-chest the dungeon. This brought my rating up to 1,335. I didn't get any loot, however. Our paladin DPS did not need his ring, and I asked people to roll. I rolled along with other members in the group and unfortunately lost to the warrior. Despite this, the warrior seemed to notice that I was rocking 2 blue rings and very generously passed it to me. In between dungeons, I quickly ran a time rift and used the currency to purchase a 402 helm. The next dungeon was a Halls of Infusion 17. Now unfortunately, I forgot to start the recording for this dungeon, so the clips will be from my stream for this run. This will be the second 17 I'm trying this reset, and I'm praying it goes better than the previous 17 Neltharus I attempted in the last episode. The dungeon started off well. The first big pull with the 2 starting packs went down without any deaths, but on the third pull we began to have some issues. The evoker died from being targeted by the containment beam twice in a row, and the warrior also died shortly after from standing in front of the spear flurry and getting the debuff. 2 deaths this early on isn't exactly great, but I hope that things would get better as the run progressed. We finished off the mobs and moved on to the next pack of 3 containment apparatuses. The containment beams can hit very hard here. The paladin went low to a containment beam as one of the mobs began casting Expulse. I tried to interrupt it, but accidentally interrupted the wrong mob. This caused the cast to go off, and 2 members of our party died, followed shortly by our healer. With only me and the warrior alive, I tried my best to self-sustain, but the warrior was focused down by the beams, and I died shortly after. This was our first wipe of the dungeon. I did not lose hope, however. Nobody left, and we went back to fight the pack again. Despite the 7 deaths we had up until this point, we had no more deaths on the way to the first boss. On the first boss, just after the intermission, when the boss was hitting around 9%, we lost the evoker to a combination of static surge and the power overload debuff. Towards the end of the fight, we also had an afflicted cry debuff go off, but despite the haste reduction, the boss died as it was below 1% at this stage. First boss down and 3 more to go. We rezzed the evoker and pressed on. On the way to the Gulping Goliath, there was only one pack that concerns me on a fortified week. That is the pack consisting of 3 shock troopers with some skulking zealots. I jumped in and the first shock trooper got off a cast, instantly killing me. In hindsight, I should have interrupted the mob myself, but was hoping the DPS was going to get the first one, so I saved my interrupt for a later cast. Owing to this death, the group did not last long. I did get a combat res, but it was a little too late. I tried to get aggro back before the healer died, but wasn't able to. This resulted in our second wipe of the dungeon, putting us up to 15 deaths. On the second attempt for the pact, we killed it without any issues and continued on to the second boss without any more deaths. On the Goliath, at around the 20% mark, we had our first death of the fight. Our warrior got hit by the swirl on the ground that spawns the smaller adds, while an AoE from the boss was also ongoing, causing him to die. However, as the boss was at 20%, I wasn't too worried, and we finished off the boss without the warrior. The next part of the dungeon is the part that always worries me the most in Halls of Infusion on a fortified week. The Drakes and Caster adds hit incredibly hard, and have been a point where many groups fail in runs with my main. Things were going great, all the way up until the final pack before the boss. I find this pack to be the hardest in the dungeon and always make sure that I have CDs ready to pull it. Once again, just like in my Halls of Infusion run in the previous episode, we had another warrior charge in before I had established any aggro, popping his CDs, taking aggro, and dying immediately before I was even in melee range. We continued fighting the pack, but the damage became a little too much for me and I died, which resulted in the paladin getting killed very quickly after. I got a res as the evoker and priest kited the mobs backwards. I tried to establish aggro again, but died, and the rest of the group followed. The third wipe of the dungeon. Despite this, we still had a lot of time left, and I thought that it would still be possible to time the run despite still having 22 deaths before the third boss. Luckily, no one left despite the warrior complaining about lack of heals on the run back to the mobs. We quickly cleaned up the remaining mobs of the pack and moved on to the third boss. At around 30% on the third boss, we had our evoker die from standing in front of the Frost Cyclone. Otherwise, the boss went down without much trouble. I'm quite happy that no one had left yet, but with the time remaining, I did think that it would be very difficult to complete the dungeon in time, as the last boss of the dungeon can take quite a long time due to its very long intermission phase. Fortunately, we had no deaths running the gauntlet to the Primal Tsunami. The boss itself went very well, and we even managed to get the boss down after only one intermission phase, allowing us to save lots of time and make the timer with 1.5 minutes remaining. This brought my rating up to 1,388. I also received a very nice pair of 428 boots with my best secondary stats, taking me up to an item level of 416. With the success of the 17, I wanted to keep moving forward and decided to try my luck at the upgraded key and Uldaman 18. Uldaman again is another dungeon that I don't particularly enjoy, but if I can complete it, even if overtimed a little, it would be a huge boost to my rating. Starting the dungeon with the first big pull, taking 3 packs of mobs at once and popping all my cooldowns. Everything went down very quickly without any deaths. I took this as a good sign of things to come and my hopes were high. Making another pull by dragging the 2 Geomancers to the pack of 3 Basilisks, I began rotating my defensives. I started to drop low due to getting 2 of the debuffs from the Basilisks and attempted to move away from melee range a little. It was here where we had an afflicted ad get a cast off just as I died. The Warlock followed while the Hunter feigned death. I got back to the pack, the Basilisks had reset, but we managed to kill off the remaining Geomancers. After killing them, it was here where I noticed the healer DC'd. I wasn't sure if this was a forced disconnect or a genuine one, and decided to give him the benefit of the doubt, thinking this was a genuine DC. After waiting for 3 minutes, we decided he wasn't coming back and the group disbanded. I took a short break and then formed another group for the 17 Uldaman that my key had hoping this run would go better than the unfortunate run just before that ended before we even really got started. I started the recording a little late this dungeon, but managed to remember just as we began to have our first few deaths on the same pack of Basilisks as the last dungeon. In total, we had 3 deaths in this pack, including myself. we regrouped before the next pack and pushed onto the first boss. The Lost Dwarfs went great, with only the healer dying towards the end of the boss. We continued to fight the boss and killed it without any more deaths and pushed towards the next boss. We had no deaths on the way to Bromac, at least until the final pack before the boss. I was taking a lot of damage on this pack and the healer didn't seem to be throwing any heals my way. This may be due to line of sight or another issue, I wasn't sure. Nevertheless, my death resulted in the Demon Hunter DPS also dying. The rest of the group kited the remaining mobs back towards the entrance. I managed to re-establish aggro and we finished them off, but not before I died one last time. Now we were at the second boss of the dungeon. As the boss was about to die, it was here where I had a driver crash, causing me to have to restart my PC. Unfortunately, due to this, I don't know what happened, other than the fact that the boss was dead and we had gained 2 new deaths, one of them being mine. With the boss dead, I met up with the rest of the group, apologized for the DC, and we started to make our way to the third boss of the dungeon. The next set of mobs have a very nasty bite ability, which when applied to the tank does huge damage. This can be avoided by moving out of melee range before the cast is finished. Unfortunately, I don't have much practice with this and did get hit a couple of times, but I didn't die, and we made it to the next boss, Sentinel Telondrus. At 75% into Telondrus, we lost our mage to a combination of Crushing Stomp and the debuff. Luckily, this was our only death on this boss. Despite being a DPS down, we did eventually manage to kill the boss, albeit much slower than I would have liked. Losing a DPS in the first quarter of a fight can really slow down progression. On the way to Emberon, there is one pack that I'm particularly cautious of, as I've had quite a few groups wipe here on other characters. This is the pack consisting of 2 Custodians, a Warder, a Weaver and a Runic Protector. This pack can hit very hard and is a good test of a group's healing and defensive capabilities. A test which I unfortunately failed, dying very quickly into the pool before I could get my defensives rolling, causing the rest of the group to die, leading to a wipe. It was here where the healer and mage left and the group fell apart. I feel like this run could still have been timed, but alas, we'll never know. I formed a new group for the newly downgraded 16 Uldaman. With the recent failure of this dungeon twice in a row, I was determined to get it cleared, hoping that this time it will be different and that we would finish the dungeon in time, or at the very least, finish the dungeon. The first big pull of this dungeon went great as usual, without any deaths, and we moved on to the pack of Geomancers and Basilisks. This pack went much better than the last 2 runs with no deaths occurring. My motivation was raised thanks to this. On the last pack before the first boss, our healer stood inside the hulking berserker's AoE and died, seconds before the mob. Our first death of the run could have easily been avoided, I thought. Either way, we rest the healer and moved on to the Lost Dwarfs. The first boss went down without any problem at all, and we began to make our way to Bromac. On the final pack before Bromac, where I died yet again, with the DK following shortly after. I got combat res and we finished off the pack. Bromac himself went great, all the way to 35% at least, where our healer died just as the Quaking Totem was killed. This caused me to go into panic mode, as without a combat res, we couldn't get the healer back and I didn't want to reset the boss. Trying my hardest to self-sustain, hoping that the DPS could keep themselves alive through the AoE, we managed to down the boss after the next Quaking Totem without any more deaths, while the whole party was at around 50% HP. Big props to the Paladin DPS here, who was throwing out heals to keep everyone alive during the AoE. On the next pack of mobs after the boss, when everything was below 20%, I got a little too greedy and didn't move away in time to avoid the jagged bite, causing me to die. However, with the pack being so low, no one else died, despite the Paladin being very close to dying. The other Custodians, before Telondrus went down, without any problems, and I managed to avoid every jagged bite hereafter. We pulled the Sentinel, and the healer died during the first crushing stomp. Despite the healer dying very early into the fight, however, we didn't reset the boss and continued to 4-man the boss down to 50%, where our combat res came off cooldown and we got the healer back up. During the time the healer was down, the paladin was helping to keep people alive with the occasional heal. With the healer back up, the rest of the fight was a breeze, and we killed the boss without any further deaths. After killing the third boss, we made our way to Emberon. I decided as my CDs were up, I would take 2 packs at once. Our DK didn't notice this and began nuking the first pack of mobs before I had grouped them, taking aggro from me and dying, with the Shadow Priest dying a little bit later to casts from the mob. With 2 DPS down, this cluster of mobs was living longer than I had anticipated, and it eventually overwhelmed us, and those of us remaining died. It appeared that I got too greedy once again. Running back, this time I took the packs one by one, and on the second pack we lost our healer to the cleaves. This was my fault, as I didn't face the mobs away in time. While not directly facing them at the group, they were also not facing away from the group. Despite this, we killed the pack without any more deaths, thanks to the amazing self-sustain that a Demon Hunter seems to be able to provide. We continued on our way, and made our way to the pack of mobs that ended our Fortunately, my CDs were ready for the pull this time, and I didn't die within the first few seconds of pulling. However, we did lose our Shadow Priest to the first AoE from the Protector. This was followed by the healer on the very next cast of the Protector. Very hard hitting AoE. As the mobs were almost dead though, I wasn't concerned. We finished them off and rezzed everyone. The rest of the trash before Emberon was a piece of cake. 14 deaths in, with 12.5 minutes left, we made it to Emberon, which we killed without any problems at all. With just one more boss to go, I felt like this dungeon could still be timed quite reasonably. We began to clear the trash towards the final boss of the dungeon, Chrono Lord Deos. We only had one death on the way to the Chrono Lord. The healer moved in front of the pack, causing him to get hit by a double cleave and dying. Other than this, however, we had no more deaths. The healer did release, however, and it seemed like he was taking his time to run back, causing us to lose quite a lot of time. We managed to make it to the final boss, pulling it with only 1.5 minutes left on the timer. I hoped we could make the timer, but that is not a lot of time to kill the boss. We didn't have any problems on the boss other than a few sand pulls that could have been placed better. Everything went well. We killed the boss, but unfortunately we didn't make the timer, going over by 49 seconds. This, however, did give me a massive rating boost of 205, as this was the first Uldaman I had completed, taking me up to a total of 1,593 rating. With this, I had made my target of 1,500 rating before the reset, and I still had time to do more. Rather than running my own key, I decided to try and join groups with dungeons that I still hadn't completed this fortified week. With me being still quite a low item level, I had a tough time getting into some groups, but eventually made it into a Brackenhide 14. The previous week when I ran this same dungeon at this level, it took the group nearly an hour to clear and I got no rating for it. I was hoping things would be better this time. My hopes were proved correct, as the run went incredibly smoothly with 0 deaths. We killed the final boss of the dungeon, but we still missed a few percent for the mobs. We killed the first pack we could see and finished the dungeon, only getting 1 chest, but this was enough to raise my rating up to 1,721. I didn't get any items, but wasn't worried about that at this stage, as I felt like I had enough gear to complete the challenge already. Still having time to complete one more dungeon, I tried to join either a Freehold or Neltharus Lair, as these were the last 2 dungeons that I had not completed this week, and getting invited to the latter at a plus 14 level. Compared to the 16s and 18s I'd just been doing, 14s felt much easier. The run went very well once again. However, this time we had a few deaths throughout the dungeon. Our first death occurred at the start of the dungeon as I was making a big pull to group up all the mobs. The mage did a little bit too much damage, took aggro and died. We combat rezzed him and killed the group, chain pulling as they were about to die. Our second death occurred just before the second boss, Uldaman, Cragshaper. On one of the Mightstone breakers, our mage didn't manage to avoid the circle from the avalanche ability, causing him to die. The pack wasn't too far from being dead, so we finished them off, rezzed him, and killed the rest of the trash in the room before pulling the boss and killing it. The last death in the dungeon we had was just before Neltharus. Pulling the two big packs before him, the mage stood a little too close to the Grub Master and got hit by its smash ability. Our combat res was back up, so we rezzed the mage and finished off the pack, before pulling the boss. We reached the final boss of the dungeon with over 13 minutes remaining. I was certain that this dungeon was as good as finished, as the group had no issues on any of the bosses prior to this. I know on this boss, the ad will always spawn on the boss's left shoulder, so I will always try to position the boss in a way that the ad will spawn on or very close to one of the crystal walls. The boss went down without any issues, and the ads dying very quickly. This brought my rating up to a grand total of 1,806. It was at this point where I didn't have time for any more dungeons this week. If I had the chance, I'd love to have gotten a freehold fortified run done as well, as this was the only dungeon which I was missing from a fortified key. This would have greatly increased my rating once again if I could have done it. Ending the second week at 1,806 rating, 400 level and 16,000 gold, I was very happy with how much I managed to get done this week, even beating my goal for the week by over 300 rating. Before I end this video, I just want to mention that I have recently started my hardcore vanilla journey on the official servers. This will be the first time I'm playing hardcore, so if you're interested, please feel free to come and check it out on my stream. Links below. That's all for this episode. If you did enjoy the video, please do give it a like, comment and subscribe, as it really does help out the channel.